immigrating to Canada was the best mistake he ever made.
Perhaps he's made some others. Maybe that'll be one of the questions we ask. Well, please welcome Ryan.
All right, we're good to go. I'll get right into this. This is me. It's 2008. You can see I got all the dreams in the world. I just graduated university as a new immigrant, and I had a degree in film studies. And I wanted to be a filmmaker, to tell stories, but becoming a filmmaker comes at a price. $80,000 was how much I was in debt when I graduated university. But it was okay. I had a plan. I had $10,000 in my bank account, and I was volunteering at the local community TV station. And I kept on telling myself, I'm going to get a job. It's going to be all right. And that's how I ended up here 6 months later. This chair was my only personal space in the world. I took the picture from the couch I slept on in a friend of a friend's apartment that I didn't have to pay rent for, so that was great. The only downside was that I ate one meal a day and couldn't be home during the day because the landlord might find out I lived there. I was within a couple days of not having a roof over my head when I got lucky and found my first of 3 jobs in 1 month. I worked at breakfast television early mornings, much music in the afternoon, and the Weather Network overnight. But the thing about having 3 jobs in 2 different cities is that you need one of these. I felt so adult. I had 3 real adult-type jobs and a car, and it was great, and it was complete shit. I maxed out my credit cards not too long later because I couldn't afford the lifestyle I was living. And obviously a big expense was my car. But I couldn't get rid of it because I had to commute to Oakville to work. But in Toronto, I could get rid of it. I could save $60 a week in parking alone just by getting a bike. So that's what I did. I went down to Bike Pirates. I got a $100 bike. I knew nothing about riding a bike in the city or maintaining a bike. And my first time out on a bike, I wiped out on the streetcar tracks in the middle of Carlton and Church. I was all right, but it didn't slow me down. I didn't really have a choice. I had to save money, and riding a bike was how I was going to do it. But even that wasn't enough. My biggest expense at the time was healthcare. As someone living here on a work permit with part-time jobs, I wasn't even entitled to OHIP, much less extended health coverage. And I have an illness that only I can see. I might be able to beat it into remission for a day or a month or even years, but it's always there. And it's always been kind of a serious thing for me. So one day I had to walk into my healthcare provider's office and tell him I couldn't afford to come anymore. And just to give you a hint of how seriously I took this, 2 years before I told my healthcare provider I couldn't come, I had come home from work, looked in the mirror, and put my fist through it because I couldn't stand what I saw there. I still have the scars to this day. And after I did that, after I destroyed that mirror, I crawled in the bathtub, and that's where they found me. Glass embedded in my knuckles, the water turning red because I was bleeding so much. And I muttered to myself, I hate my life. I hate my life. Over and over again. So it was a big deal when I told my therapist I could not come anymore. Because that's my dad in his house, and that's my mom in her house. I wanted to default my loans, but they had co-signed on them. And their houses were not worth as much as my loans were. Their income could not afford to pay off my loans for me. If I didn't pay them off, they would lose everything they had. So I knew I had to give up on life in order to have a life. My mental and physical health did not matter because I could not afford to care. I had to keep riding a bike even though it wasn't safe. I had to stop seeing a therapist because I couldn't afford to. And my therapist looked me in the eye when I told him I couldn't afford to come, and he told me I didn't have to pay. And I sincerely believe that's the only reason why I'm standing here today. And eventually, I started to ride. And I rode, and I rode, and I rode, and I could pay him $25 a session. And then I could pay him full price. And along the way, I found out that riding a bike wasn't just something that saved me money. It made me happier. It smoothed out my lows and increased my highs. And I met friends, and it took me around the world. And eventually, I even got a job because I rode bikes. And that's how I got to here, the second happiest day of my life. I just crested the Saratoga Gap in California. And I did it all on my own with all of my gear on the back of my bike. And I must have stopped 18 times, and I even walked a bit up that mountain. But I got to the top, and I was elated. But no one should have to go through what I did to get to this point. No one should have to give up on their physical safety or their mental safety in order to save money. These are things that should be taken care of, but they aren't. And we need to do something as a society about that. And if you're wondering what the happiest day of my life was, it's when I got my citizenship. Questions?
Where are you from originally?
I'm from Michigan. Yeah. Right about here. Detroit is here. I came from here. Jackson.
At what point did you realize that cycling played that much of a role in your mental health?
It wasn't until years later, until I dug out of it and was able to look back and reflect on these times, because it's not something that I speak about often. It's not something many people speak about, and much like it's hard for me to even think about it at times.
What's your favorite ride in Toronto?
My favorite ride in Toronto? Well, I'm going to have to go outside the city limits because I don't really like riding in Toronto. Unless you count the Don Valley, that was okay. I commuted that way for years. I like going out to Rattlesnake Point.
You're really courageous. Thank you.
Thank you. She asked me if I want to say anything else. If you want to donate to the Canadian Mental Health Association, they do a ride every year, and they provide health care to people who can't afford it.
Thank you, Ryan, for reminding us